Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this initiative being brought to you by the International Centre Goa in association with Prudent Media. This initiative really will involve periodically holding such interviews with eminent persons across scholarship, public policy and governance, with a view to bringing refreshing perspectives to you, the viewer at home, and to civil society at large. So we are starting it off today with our first distinguished guest, who is Professor Srikant Kondapalli. Professor Srikant Kondapalli is an eminent professor of Chinese studies at the School of International Studies at JNU. He is a prolific writer, commentator, and an intimate watcher of various issues of strategy and policy regarding China. So we'll be engaging him today in a conversation about the present nature of India-China relations, China's own rise, the strategic implications of that rise, and how should India position itself in that context for India's own rise in the region and beyond. So with these words, we begin our interview. So Professor Kondapalli, a very warm welcome to this interview. Let me begin with a very general question. Ever since Prime Minister Modi has taken office, he has given newfound importance to the relationship with China. There have been a series of meetings at various levels, and Prime Minister Modi will be going to China on a reciprocal visit this May. It would mean that within the first year of his office, there would have been 2 summit meetings, something I think quite unprecedented for India-China relations. So in this context, where do you see the current state of the bilateral relationship, and is it poised for a kind of a takeoff into a new orbit going forward?
Indeed, as Prime Minister Modi mentioned soon after the inaugural in last May, that the relations with China is very significant. As the largest neighbor for India, relations with China are very significant. Secondly, China has also become the second largest trading partner for India, at times the largest trading partner, and also now the second largest trading partner. So in terms of the economy, it's a huge significance for the Indian context. Thirdly, there are several Indian companies which are functioning in China, and we also expect that the investments issue is carried forward. And last year, when President Xi Jinping visited India, we have also signed 2 agreements related to the manufacturing zones in Ahmedabad and Pune. Altogether, about 5 manufacturing zones were to be established as part of the 2013 deal. So in other words, there is a context where we can upgrade our relations from purely trading nations to investing in each other in a substantial manner. So this is very significant for both the countries. As both are rising simultaneously, there is the necessity for both of them to interact at the economy level at various levels. Indeed, there are over 30 discussions between India and China in a structured manner. At the Prime Minister's office level, there is a special representative mechanism. The 18th special representative mechanism is to be held day after tomorrow between State Councillor Yang Jiechi and the National Security Advisor Mr. Ajit Doval. There is also the discussion at various other ministries level. Ministry of External Affairs has a strategic dialogue. 5 of these dialogues took place between the 2 sides. Then there is a joint working group meeting on border issues, which has not been held for the last few years. There is also the mechanism under the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Commerce. There is a strategic and economic dialogue. The Niti Aayog will be holding the 4th strategic and economic dialogue in the near future. Then there is also the discussions between the HRD Ministry and the Ministry of Education in China about the exchange of scholars and cultural interactions. So a series of discussions, structured dialogue processes with China, which meant that the institutional mechanism is being fulfilled and various interactions are taking place between different ministries. There is the Defense Ministry initiative in 2006 for an annual defense dialogue as well, which brought in the hand-in-hand joint operations between the 2 armed forces. So all this suggests that we now have a very structured institutional dialogue, which is useful for these two rising countries so that they do not make any mistakes about each other, miscalculate each other's intentions. And for this, it is very necessary for them to enhance the dialogue process.
In fact, it was very interesting. I was quite intrigued by the point of manufacturing which you mentioned. Because if you look at public opinion here in India, of course, much of it has been conditioned by the War of 62 and what's happened since. So at one level, there has been the sense of mistrust and distrust. But there's also a great deal of admiration about the way in which China is able to provide such staggering infrastructure. And also a certain apprehension about China's pioneering low-cost manufacturing and how it has undercut, even I may say decapitated, a lot of industries here and even in India. Since Mr. Modi has made the Make in India initiative the fulcrum of his economic philosophy going forward, what kind of a role do you see for China within this whole Make in India manufacturing drive that India has to boost Indian manufacturing or to bring in Chinese core competency to help Indian low-cost manufacturing?
I think it is imperative for India to learn from the Chinese in the manufacturing sector, because the Chinese have become the hub of the world in producing the manufactured goods. 60% roughly of the Chinese GDP is composed of the manufacturing sector's contribution and exports from this sector. In the case of India, 59% is roughly about service sector. So during Li Keqiang's visit in May 2013, it was proposed that India will teach China in the service sector, while China will provide for the manufacturing expertise to India. So there has been a proposal by the Premier himself in May 2013 during his visit to India. So we now have initiated a program of sharing experiences in both these. There is now a move to set up these manufacturing bases. The NIIT, TCS, Wipro, and Infosys, a lot of them have set up shop in China and have been teaching the Chinese in the software, IT software industries. So there is a move that has been made in 2013 of sharing experiences on the manufacturing and service sector. So that's number one. Number two is that the Chinese labor costs are increasing substantially, and it makes perfect logic for them to shift some of those to relatively low labor costs areas where there is stability in terms of political system as well as an economic opportunity. Thirdly, they also look at the skills of that particular area. In this case, the Indian context is a good opportunity for China in relocating some of its manufacturing bases. For example, in Beijing, the cost of labor is about $220, while in Delhi or in Goa, it would be about roughly $90 to $100. So it makes a huge difference in terms of the profits for the manufacturing goods and other establishments. So this is one area where there has been. The manufacturing units would also look for the HRD levels, human resource development levels, the literacy, skills, and so on. And India, with the third largest scientific manpower, engineers, doctors, and IIT and ITI products, it's a huge base for China to utilize that base to produce goods and services. So in other words, there is the second aspect, which is the higher labor costs in China increasing and providing an opportunity for them to shift over. Initially, they thought about shifting to Bangladesh, but Bangladesh had a series of explosions, 16 explosions in the year that they thought about, and they developed cold feet on the Bangladesh front. Bangladesh also had the relatively low labor costs and various skills, but the political stability issues in Bangladesh had provided this opportunity for India to kind of invite the manufacturing sector. But actually the manufacturing sector of Japan is much more sophisticated and high tech. In fact, the Chinese themselves learned from the Japanese and the Koreans. So I think India also has to diversify more towards Japan, South Korea and Taiwan, because the model of development in some of these countries is a stable kind of package. For example, South Korean companies, they adopt the whole village where they have set up a company like Hyundai in Chennai. They adopt the whole village and they provide education and so on. They also provide skills development for the workers, and the per capita income of these the adopted villages, etc., had substantially gone up in Chennai and other places. So in other words, that's a model which is useful for India in terms of social stability issues. So I think India also has to diversify to those where they have high grade manufacturing sector.
And I think it will also help us address some of the trade imbalances also between our two countries, because while trade has been quite bullish and buoyant, the terms of trade have been in favor of Beijing vis-a-vis India, and those I think have been concerns in the political circles which have been expressed. So
indeed, the trade difference between India and China is becoming a huge problem, a crisis in fact, because the last year, for instance, in 2014, we had a $35 billion loss to the Chinese. Out of $70 billion of trade, the Chinese had a surplus over the Indian exports. So we lost about $35 billion last year to China. Cumulatively between 2007 till 2014, India lost something like $212 billion to China. Now, the trade imbalance is actually between business people. So we should not actually kind of politicize this, except for one issue, which is that the Chinese trade deficit accounts for nearly 50% of the current account deficit of India, which means these days the fiscal deficits issue has been a major issue for everybody. The government expenditure as compared to revenues has become a crisis for every country. Remember, last year the United States was almost shut down and President Obama could not go to Indonesia because there was no money left for them. So in other words, the trade deficits are actually contributing to this current account deficits, fiscal deficits. So this is one major issue that India actually is suggesting to China, that they have to open up the market and they have to open the market for the Indian pharmaceuticals, Indian software companies and other, where India has a stronger position. However, so far the Chinese have not opened up the market. So this is a crucial issue that has been.
You mentioned about the whole manufacturing issue, but one of the fundamental underpinnings to Chinese economic growth has been its tremendous demand for natural resources from outside. And I say this also in the Goan context because Goa has been a big mining state, and even though mining had been suspended for the last 2.5 years, when it was operational, a major portion of our mining ore would be shipped out to countries of China, Japan and South Korea. Now as mining resumes again in Goa, and obviously that will be one of the destinations, but China also is changing its own profile of sourcing such commodities from the world market. Plus the very prices of commodities of these kind of strategic resources has come down. So in that context, what impact could this new profile have on resource economies like for instance in Goa and across the world with regard to Chinese demand?
Indeed, there has been a reduction in the commodity prices in the last 1 year. However, China rise is basically on consumption of huge raw materials from abroad. So one of this is obviously iron ore, manganese and bauxite and other minerals.